Hello everyone, it's Keith again, and I wanted to do another video responding to Alisa Childers. And in this video, I think what I would like to do is just in general respond to the entire sort of assumption that Alisa Childers brings to this conversation. First of all, she's constantly pitting progressive Christianity against traditional Christian doctrine as she understands it. And in her mind and in her perspective, progressive Christians are dangerous, largely because they embrace new ideas that are not the old traditional ideas, again in her mind, the old traditional Christian ideas. We'll get to that in a second. But overall, again, what she's warning people about is that progressive Christianity is dangerous, and it's dangerous because it embraces new theologies, new ideas that are not, what we were handed basically by Jesus and the apostles, and the early church, if you will. And then this is what makes it dangerous. They're embracing these newer ideas, these things that are moving, that are new age ideas or theologies that are pulling people away from what is in her mind sort of main and plain, the bedrock of Christian theology. So let me respond in general to that. And quickly, there's just three things that I feel like Alisa Childers doesn't understand, and what in many ways there's a huge blind spot for her. In other words, Alyssa, if I could talk to you directly, I know you won't respond to me. I've left you messages. I've tried to contact you on Twitter and on your YouTube channel, and you've ignored me completely. So this is my only means of communicating to you and to people that watch your videos. Here's what I would want you to understand, Alyssa. All of those things you're warning Christians about these new ideas that are drawing people away from traditional Christianity, and here's what you don't understand and what you don't realize. You are doing that exact same thing. And maybe it's hypocrisy. Maybe it's just an ignorance. There's just a blind spot and you don't realize that you're doing it. But I'm going to give you three examples of how you, Alyssa, are more progressive than I am. That you're more progressive than some of these Christians that you are critiquing. In other words, Alyssa, you embrace new ideas that contradict traditional early Christian theology. Well, one of the first ways that you do this is that you define the gospel based on an atonement theory, penal substitutionary atonement theory. Now, first of all, that's an atonement theory, not the gospel. The gospel is not an atonement theory, number one. The gospel that you preach and that you defend, Alyssa, which is penal substitutionary atonement theory, did not originate in Christian theology until the 1500s, when it was officially introduced by John Calvin. Now, John Calvin modified a doctrine that was introduced by Anselm, again, some 500, 600 years later, after Christ. But penal substitutionary atonement theory, as you teach it and as you understand it, is new. You understand? For 1,500 years, no Christian would have communicated the gospel the way you do. You champion a new version of the gospel that Jesus did not preach. When Jesus preached the gospel, he did not preach penal substitutionary atonement theory. And you know why? I know that because if he did, John Calvin wouldn't have to have invented it in the 1500s. And if you study even the history of atonement theories, what you notice is that there's been 7 or 8 different atonement theories all throughout church history. And that penal substitutionary atonement theory comes again 1,500 years after Jesus, and only after the development of 5 or 6 or 7 other atonement theories that eventually led up to Calvin taking the most current one for him, which was Anselm's theory of satisfaction. And he just tweaked it a little bit into what we now know as penal substitutionary atonement theory. Now, I don't accept that theory, but even if you did accept that theory, you would have to agree that it's a new teaching. It is a new theology that came only after 1,500 years of Christian thought and debate and reasoning. Okay? So that's one. The second one is this doctrine of eternal torment. Now, again, if you study church history, and I would really recommend that you do, what you'll notice is that for the first 500 years of church history, there have always been three views of the doctrine of hell. I mean, from the beginning. Most of these views were located in various cities or regions and schools of thought that basically taught these three different views. But we know this because we can study the writings of the early church fathers, even all the way up to Augustine, that when Augustine wrote about his position on the view of eternal torment, he said, even now very many of Christians disagree with my view of eternal torment. So he admitted, even as he championed the eternal torment view, that he was in the minority, because very many people not only rejected that view, they embraced another view, and this was the dominant view. There were, again, three views throughout church history of the doctrine of hell. Again, always were. All three of them, by the way, based on Scripture, so they're all three biblical in the sense that they are based on the Scriptures, not on emotions or feelings or things we wish were true, but on the teachings of Jesus and of Paul specifically. And those three views are annihilation, eternal torment, of course, which we all know, and universal reconciliation. Now, the majority view for the first 500 years, meaning the majority of Christians for the first 500 years, and this is documented, you can go and look at it, study it historically. I wrote a book on this called Jesus Undefeated, where I look at all three of the views historically, the different early church fathers who championed each of these three views, and document the fact that the majority view for the first 500 years was universal reconciliation. So, it wasn't until, again, Augustine and after, so let's say after the first 500 years of church history, because of the dominance and the rise of Catholic teachers who were in Rome. By the way, the city of Rome was the seat of the school that taught eternal torment, which is, again, as Rome continued to rise in prominence and power in the Christian church and many other factors involved, eternal torment became the dominant view. But for the first 500 years, it was the minority view. And the majority of Christians for 500 years taught universal reconciliation. Now, we can get into that in another video, perhaps. But again, Alyssa, you champion a relatively new doctrine of eternal torment, which, frankly, according to the stream of church history, that would make you a progressive. Because you're embracing a new theory that didn't gain prominence until after the first 500 years of church history. That's the second one. And the third thing that she embraces, which is a new doctrine, is this doctrine of dispensationalism and the end times rapture theory. This came up in the 1800s. Yes, in the 1800s, John Nelson Darby championed this view of the end times rapture. And then this is why all of a sudden after that view began to gain prominence in America, because of people like Dwight Moody and the Scofield Reference Bible and seminaries that came much later that began to then sort of teach and champion this doctrine. It's become today the dominant view of the church. But again, for 1,850 years, the majority of time, no Christian thought this way. No Christian set dates for expected, same things were going to happen in the Middle East, and this was the Antichrist was going to rise in the mark of the beast and all that stuff. That's not how Christians thought about when the end. And really, when they read scriptures like Daniel and the Olivet Discourse, and when they read Revelation, they saw those scriptures as having already been fulfilled in AD 70. They were not talking about things that had yet to come in the future. Now, how do I know that Alysa Childers believes that doctrine and champions that doctrine? Well, maybe I don't know it specifically, but here's what I do know. Alyssa, you've never done a video contradicting anything about that view. So it's like if you saw that view as something that was dangerous, and by the way, it is, people have lost their lives over it. People have quit their jobs because they believe someone set a date that Jesus is coming back any minute now. Well, isn't that something you should warn people about? I mean, if you don't believe it, I would love for you to do a video on that and contradict that view and point out how that view of end times rapture theory and dispensational theology, which is the dominant view of most Christian churches in America, especially, talk about how that's dangerous. Let's do a video series on that rather than on progressive Christianity. But again, in your definition, that is progressive Christianity. That's very progressive and it's very dangerous. And in fact, I just talked to someone this week who mentioned that their reading the Left Behind series is what led them to embrace the QAnon conspiracy, which is right now, people have died because of this and are still confused about this. And it's causing incredible division in the body of Christ and in families that are being ripped apart because of this absolute nonsense. But again, let's understand the root of where this stuff comes from goes back to John Nelson Darby and his introduction of dispensational end times rapture theory, which is not taught in the scriptures. It is not what the Bible teaches. It's a theory that he invented and perpetrated on the church and has now been embraced as truth and as biblical doctrine, but it is a new progressive theology. So this is one of the things that I feel I have to speak up about. It's one of the things that actually annoys me about Alyssa, because Alyssa spends all of her time attacking progressive Christians with their new ideas, but she herself embraces very new ideas that are just as dangerous and just as, if anything, you're going to follow this idea of progressive theology. It's a new theology. And I have one more thing, actually. Here's a bonus one. Something else that Alyssa believes that is a new teaching, and is a progressive, under her definition of progressive, a relatively new teaching that has been introduced into Christianity. And it's been since like 1948. Like in 1948, the English translation of the scriptures were changed, and someone went in and changed words to mean what they wanted them to mean. Now that alone is something that Alysa Childers should get upset about. If I told Alyssa, hey Alyssa, there are some theologians who have actually gone into the English translations of the Bible and they have changed words to say something in the English translations that it does not say, to mean something it does not mean, and it's for the sole purpose of promoting a teaching that is not in the Bible. That should make Alysa Childers angry and upset and should make her say, you know what, we should warn Christians about this. But here's the word that was changed or that was added to the scriptures in 1948, the word homosexual. Yes, the word homosexual was added to the English translation of the Bible and the Revised Standard Version of the Bible as recently as 1948. And there were actually two words in the Greek, malakoi and asenakotai. Malakoi simply means soft. It's been used. It was used in the early first century always used, by the way, as an insult to a straight man that he was girly or effeminate. By the way, a man that shaved his beard in the first century, certainly in first century Palestine and Jewish culture, a man without a beard would have been malakoi, meaning he looked like a woman, because women don't have beards. Women have smooth faces. Or if a man had long hair. Because women had long hair, men weren't supposed to do that. That would have been malakoi. Okay? That's not homosexuality. We can agree, right? That's not homosexuality. The other word is asenakotai, and asenakotai, without getting into, again, I can go into much more into depth in this in another video if you'd like me to do so. But essentially, asenakotai translates to pedophilia, This is the way it would have been understood in the first century. This is the way it was used post Paul writing about it, using that word in his letter. This is the simplest, most obvious thing that word means. So pedophilia and malakoi, a man shaving his beard or having long hair or in any way sort of looking or behaving like a woman. But again, that definition was very, very strict. Those are the two words that in 1948 were changed in our English Bibles to homosexual. That word is not in the Bible at that point. It's not what it says. And yet again, Alysa Childers isn't upset about that, doesn't warn people about that, and quite frankly, often will quote those scriptures in her English Bible that say homosexual to affirm the idea that God hates homosexuals. That is a progressive, and I would argue, dangerous teaching that people have added to the Bible. It was not there, and someone went in and added it. That is a progressive thing to do, and a dangerous thing to do, I would argue. Again, I would love to have this conversation with Alyssa at any point or at any time. If she would like to join me, I'm a pretty easygoing guy. I promise to be nice. And I would love to talk more about these kinds of things. But until she does talk to me, this is my only means of talking to her or to you about the things that she teaches, and to warn you about the progressive theology that Alisa Childers champions. These new teachings that go against the early Christian. We're talking the first 500 years, the first 1,500 years, the first 1,850 years, the first 1,948 years of church history. She embraces new doctrines and new ideas that are contradicted by those early Christians. This is again why, frankly, I do not identify myself as a progressive Christian as much as I identify myself as a regressive Christian, meaning I would like to see Christians not move forward in this new way of adding new things. Let's go back to Jesus. Let's go back to the teachings of Jesus. Let's go back to the teachings of the apostles, the early church fathers, the way they understood Jesus, the way they understood the gospel, which again is not any of the things that Alysa Childers believes and champions. Let's go back to that. So she and I would agree at least on the statement that in many ways progressive Christianity is not good and is dangerous. Just because it's newer doesn't mean it's truer. But that also goes for doctrines like penal substitutionary atonement theory, the doctrine of eternal torment, which, by the way, Jesus never teaches. It's not in the New Testament. It's not in the Old Testament either. Again, that's another video. Or this idea of end times rapture theory, or the idea that the New Testament condemns people who are homosexual. All of those are new ideas, new theologies, progressive theologies that Alysa Childers embraces, teaches, and promotes. Be careful. Don't embrace those things. Don't believe those things. Be a regressive Christian. Let's go back to Jesus. Let's go back to the early church. Let's not embrace those newer theologies, those progressive theologies that Alysa Childers does.